Good. So, thank you very much, dear chair of this panel and dear audience. Um, I would like to begin by expressing my sincere gratitude for the opportunity to speak at this conference and to thank the organizers for their efforts in bringing us together. The concept note of this conference referred to Rahul Sankrityayan as the forgotten hero, which immediately caught my attention. It prompted me to reflect on the protagonist of my book, and I was struck by the realization that nearly a decade had passed since I completed it. Has he been forgotten? Have I forgotten him? Although I have been occupied with other pursuits, I continue to uncover new documents and ideas within the field of Sankrityayan studies. It is evidence of the depth and richness of his heritage that even after all this time, there are still untapped resources and fresh perspectives to explore. And yet, despite being overlooked, he remains a hero. This brings us all here today, not to let this Indian hero fade from memory, but to reconnect with his legacy, revisit his life, and acknowledge his invaluable contributions. While Sankrityayan is certainly a multifaceted personality, there is one defining act that cemented his place in the broader global intellectual circle: his work related to Buddhism and his journeys through Tibet, which can also contribute to the Gyan Bharatam mission. This heroic deed gained him recognition not only in India, but also in international intellectual circles. So, while Sankrityayan may have been forgotten by many, today we come together to celebrate the lasting impact of his heroism. This three-day conference on Mahapandit Rahul Sankrityayan aims to analyze his role and contribution to reviving Indian Buddhist traditions. The year 2025 marks a century since Sankrityayan wrote his first book, a utopian novel by Sri Sadi, where his pride for Buddha, his philosophy, and his desire for Tibet travel are expressed for the first time in writing. Sankrityayan's growing attraction towards Buddhism, his pride in the Buddhist philosophy, his respect for the Buddha, and his desire to re-establish former Buddhist institutions, Nalanda and Takshashila, as a center for studying Buddhism are expressed in this book. The figure of Buddha, his philosophy and works on Buddhism embodied a source of immense pride for India in Sankrityayan's opinion, and that was a profound symbol of inspiration for him in his endeavors. Be it manuscript collection, travel to Tibet in search of manuscripts, or his literary and scholarly contribution. Therefore, in my opinion, today we are here in a situation where we are now looking at the past and considering both Buddha and Rahul Sankrityayan and Indian pride. Today, we are here to pay tribute to both these influential figures of South Asia and their lasting legacy in our intellectual heritage. Today, we return to these inspirations and analyze them anew. Before we discuss these points, let us first see the inspirations of Sankrityayan's quest for Buddhist manuscripts in his own words. Of the more than 4,000 lost Buddhist manuscripts, if a few more are found in Sanskrit, it can only be in Tibet. It is thus we conceive how great the hand of the Tibetan monasteries has been in the preservation of our heritage. At a certain epoch, our Pandits and the Tibetan Swaraj had, over centuries, translated the works from their Sanskrit, Prakrit, or Apabhramsha into the Tibetan language. The time is coming when these will have to be retrieved into Sanskrit or Hindi. Only then will our understanding of our heritage be complete. This quote makes it clear that Sankrityayan not only wanted to bring Tibetan translations of the lost original Sanskrit texts, but he also wanted to revive them in Sanskrit, and at the same time, he wanted to make a Hindi translation of them so that it could reach a wider Indian community. And no wonder, as we all know, Sankrityayan's love for Hindi and his devotion to enrich the Hindi literary treasure. Today, we can discuss the source of his inspiration for this heroic act from three different perspectives: personal inspirations, legacy of Indology, and Indian pride. One of the heroic qualities that sets Sankrityayan apart from the ordinary man is his profound sense of gratefulness. In a world where many fail to acknowledge the contributions of others, where individuals often overlook or neglect to recognize someone's hard work, creativity, or effort, Sankrityayan stands as a beacon of appreciation. Sankrityayan remains steadfast in his belief that gratitude should be more than just a fleeting gesture. What makes him heroic in this regard is not simply the act of acknowledging those who have helped him, but the sincerity and depth with which he does so. Whether it was physical assistance, intellectual support, or emotional encouragement, Sankrityayan never failed to recognize the role others played in shaping his journey. He understood that every person who had touched his life, even in the smallest way, contributed to his growth, and he was always determined to repay these debts. For that, he mentioned every detail of his life, who he met, and what kind of inspiration he took. He paid his debt by extensively writing about them. His gratitude wasn't just a surface level acknowledgement within himself. He let the world know about it. His depths were moral and intellectual. He wanted to ensure that no one who had contributed to his life would go unrecognized or unthanked. His acknowledgments of these individuals is captured with remarkably sincerity in his books, where he takes the time to give credit to those whose influence shaped his thinking, his character, and his accomplishments. In his book, Jinka Main Kritagya, Sankrityayan writes with clarity and modesty, detailing the contributions of others. It is here that we see the true magnitude of his gratitude. Not only in this book, but in most of the writings, including his autobiography, Meri Jeevan Yatra, he does not miss any chance to do that. Through his words, he expresses the timeless value of gratitude, demonstrating that a hero is not someone who stands alone, but rather someone who recognizes and honors the community of people who help him along the way. We can see that what he writes in the preface of Jinka Main Kritagya, he says, जिनका मैं कृतज्ञ लिखकर मैं उस ऋण से उऋण होना चाहता हूं जो इन बुजुर्गों, बंधुओं और मित्रों का मेरे ऊपर है। उनमें से कितने ही अब इस संसार में नहीं हैं, इसीलिए इन पंक्तियों को वो देख नहीं सकते। इनमें सिर्फ वही नहीं है जिनसे मैंने मार्गदर्शन पाया या कुछ सीखा, बल्कि ऐसे भी पुरुष हैं जिनका संपर्क मेरे मानसिक संबल के रूप में जीवन यात्रा में सहायक हुआ। कित्तों से बिना उनकी जानकारी, उनके व्यवहार और बर्ताव से मैंने बहुत कुछ सीखा। कृतज्ञ और कृतवेदी मनुष्य को सदा होना चाहिए। इसी परंपरा को मानते हुए मैं अपने इन मधुर स्मरणीय पुरुषों के बारे में कुछ लिख रहा हूं। इतनों के बारे में मेरी जीवन यात्रा में कितनी ही बातें आ चुकी हैं। For Sankrityayan, his first introduction to Buddhism came through Bhadanta Bodhanand, a moment that marked a significant turning point in his intellectual journey. In 1916, Bodhanand opened the door to Buddhism for Sankrityayan, presenting him with ideas and philosophies that would profoundly shape his thinking. This introduction was not just an intellectual awakening, but a deep emotional connection to the teachings of the Buddha. Bhadanta Bodhananda's influence was so strong that Sankrityayan credited him as the pivotal figure who bridged the gap between him and Buddhism. At the time, Sankrityayan was follower of Arya Samaj, and despite his strong allegiance to Arya Samaj, he openly acknowledged Buddha's greatness in his Arya Samaji talks. बुद्ध का नाम मैं पहले भी सुन चुका था। मुसाफिर विद्यालय में जाने के बाद बौद्ध मिशनरियों के बारे में अक्सर सुना करता और बिना जाने सुने स्वयं भी इसे दोहराता था। सबसे पहले जिस पुरुष ने बौद्ध धर्म का ज्ञान दरवाजा मेरे लिए खोला वो स्थविर बोधानंद ही थे। Under Bhadanta Bodhananda's guidance, Sankrityayan discovered a new dimension of Buddhist studies. Following Bodhananda's suggestion, he began studying Pali using Satish Chandra Vidyabhushan's book. As Bodhananda pointed out, that apart from the Dhammapada, no other Pali Buddhist texts were translated into Hindi or transcribed in Devanagari script. This information indicated the urgency for Sankrityayan to learn Pali language, to know more about Buddhism, and its knowledge helped him later in Sri Lanka to study the Tripitaka. Mahabodhi Society Calcutta helped Sankrityayan to join Vidyalankara Parivena in Sri Lanka. He studied Buddhist texts for 19 months. He also widened his knowledge about Indian cultural history. Finally, upon reaching Sri Lanka in 1927, Sankrityayan devoted himself to learning Pali and Tripitaka. Sankrityayan's passion for studying Buddhism grew ever stronger during his trip to Ladakh. Inspired by Bhadanta Bodhananda to study Pali for Buddhist studies, Sankrityayan later realized in Ladakh that many important Sanskrit Buddhist texts had been preserved in Tibetan. But later his knowledge of Pali was not enough and he had to learn Tibetan. He credits Bodhananda for rekindling the flame of Buddhism among Indians. And it is clear that Sankrityayan was one of those Indians who kept that light burning throughout his life. He remembers Bodhananda's three main aims, which are very similar to his own, such as the return of the Buddha to his land of birth, the destruction of caste system in India, and the reading of books. वर्षों बाद 1927 में जिज्ञासा को पूरी तौर से तृप्त करने का अवसर मिला जबकि मैं लंका गया। भारतीयों में बौद्ध धर्म का दीपक पुनः जलाने वाले वे प्रथम पुरुष थे। उनकी तीन जबरदस्त आकांक्षाएं थीं। बुद्ध को उनकी जन्मभूमि में फिर से लौटा कर लाना, भारत से जात पात का उन्मूलन करना और पुस्तकावलोकन। After his stay in Sri Lanka, he began to translate Buddhist literature to Hindi. Here we see an announcement from Mahabodhi Pustak Bhandar in Sarnath, where Sankrityayan's books on Buddhism are listed as Buddhacharya in Hindi, Dhammapad is also in Hindi, Abhidharma Kosha in Sanskrit, Vigyapti Matrata Siddhi is a translation into Sanskrit from Chinese, Buddha Dharma Kya Hai, and बुद्धों का अनात्मवाद। By this time, we can see that the urgency of translating Buddhist texts into Hindi was more of a public concern. Sankrityayan mentions in the preface of Dhammapad that there were already other Hindi translations of Dhammapad. The publishers repeatedly asked him to translate this again into Hindi, including other Buddhist texts. It was a request of Mahabodhi Sabha as it decided to publish a series of Buddhist texts in Hindi, and it was Sankrityayan to help them with the translation. Here we can see a publisher's note in Sankrityayan's Dhammapad. रक्त मांस भाषा विचार सभी दृष्टियों से हिंदी भाषा भाषी भगवान बुद्ध के उत्तराधिकारी हैं। इन्हीं के पूर्वजों ने उनके अमृतमय उपदेशों को सर्वप्रथम अपनाया। इन्होंने ही दुनिया में भारत की धार्मिक और सांस्कृतिक विजय दुंदुभी बजाई। पूर्वजों की इस अद्भुत और अमर कीर्ति का स्मरण करते किसका सिर ऊंचा न होगा। लेकिन ये कितने शोक की बात है कि मातृभाषा हिंदी में भगवान के दिव्य संदेश नहीं के बराबर हैं। इसी कमी को दूर करने के लिए हिंदी में महाबोधि ग्रंथमाला निकालने का उपक्रम हुआ है। धम्मपद माला का प्रथम पुष्प है। आगे निकलने वाली पुस्तकों के सस्तेपन और सुंदर छपाई का अनुमान इसी पुस्तक से आप कर सकते हैं। माला की दूसरी पुस्तक होगी मध्यलिका। Sankrityayan was a deeply aware individual, not only attuned to global political developments, but also keenly engaged with the intellectual currents of Indology. He had already experienced and tasted part of the traditional Sanskrit education system, but it did not fully captivate him. He sought something different, new, challenging, and intellectually stimulating. As a youth in Arya Samaj, he was deeply passionate about completing his studies and envisioned traveling to Eastern countries, particularly China and Japan, to spread the Vedic Dharma. This early ambition reveals that Kedarnath Pandey, born in Kanela, was no ordinary individual. His aspirations went beyond the typical goals of settling down, making a family, and earning a living, which was common in his village. He was drawn to politics and was imprisoned. However, politics was never his true calling, and he did not derive fulfillment from it. His involvement was more a product of the times, an era when the country was caught in the fever of the independence movement. Gandhi's call for the Asahयोग Andolan naturally drew Sankrityayan into politics, as it did to many others. Yet, his heart was not in it. Sankrityayan was fundamentally an intellectual, and his true passion was in ideas and intellectual pursuits. We can say that it was perhaps due to Sankrityayan's introduction to the study of historical and archaeological documents. Not only this, he also read the scholarly introductions on Tripitaka published by Pali Text Society and current and older issues of Royal Asiatic Society Ceylon, Bengal, and Bombay. He had learned Brahmi script in Hazaribagh jail in Sri Lanka. He also read old numbers of Epigraphica Indica. Epigraphica Indica is a 43-volume series containing a corpus of inscriptional material from pre-colonial South Asia in facsimile format, Roman transliteration, and English translation, edited by several scholars and published under the auspice of the Archaeological Survey of British India from 1892. We can say Sri Lanka's stay and his study there helped him to clarify his goals of life, and it was an introduction to the Indology. Indology, or a study of Indian subcontinent, which is called South Asian Studies these days, as a discipline and subject came into being in the 18th century. However, its roots dates back to the period of Greek linking with India during Mauryan Empire. By the coming of the 19th century, Indology as an academic subject emerged. The Asiatic Society was founded in Calcutta in 1784. Societe Asiatique was formed in 1822, the Royal Asiatic Society in 1824, and the American Oriental Society in 1842. The school of thought had started to study the various features of the Indian subcontinent with all of its details in respect of language, culture, and sociology. Its main contribution was in the domain of detailed studies of spiritual traditions of Indian cultures and religions. Besides inspirations and his interest in Buddhism, the activities in the intellectual world also motivated and encouraged Sankrityayan. What was going on in the field of South Asian and Tibetan studies, which was called Indology at that time, Sankrityayan got interested into that. Not only this, he also met European scholars there and established relations with them. He mentions of meeting a German scholar, Rudolf Otto, in Sri Lanka already in 1928. मैं जिस वक्त लंका आया था उस वक्त पाली को सिर्फ छुआ भर था। संस्कृत को मैंने अच्छी तरह पढ़ा था, लेकिन पुरातत्व, पुरालिपि और इतिहास की मौलिक सामग्री का मेरा अध्ययन नहीं के बराबर था। अब इन चीजों का मुझे काफी ज्ञान था। मैंने 19 महीनों में सिर्फ पाली त्रिपिटक का ही अध्ययन नहीं किया, बल्कि भारत, लंका की पुरातत्व की रिपोर्टों, हिंदुस्तान और विदेशों की इतिहास संबंधी अनुसंधान पत्रिकाओं का विधिवत पारायण किया था। Indology may be said to have come into being when European scholarship discovered Sanskrit. This is generally believed to have in the closing years of the 18th century. That is round about 1784, in which year the world's first Asiatic Society was founded in Calcutta. English translations of several Sanskrit works were translated during that time, such as Bhagavad Gita in 1785, Hitopadesha in 1787, Shakuntal in 1789, the Ritusamhara in 1792, and the Manusmriti in 1794, through which an exotic civilization of a somewhat mysterious, enigmatic character came to be unveiled before the eager intelligentsia of the West. Till then, the treasures of Sanskrit had remained the sole property of a few Indian scholars who guarded that secret trust against all kind of contamination. At the same time, the Western scholars and libraries started collecting manuscripts from South Asia, then undivided India and Nepal. Some manuscripts were bought and some were just taken to the different libraries and museums in Europe. It is worth noting here that the Rana Prime Minister of Nepal, Chandra Samser, sold 6,000 Oriental manuscripts from Nepal to the Bodleian Library, Oxford, with the help of Mahamahopadhyaya Haraprasad Shastri, that were stored in Varanasi in a resident of a Brahmin. As evidence, we have a letter here written by Haraprasad Shastri, where he writes, "My dear sir, I had been to Banaras and I saw the Pandit. He is still willing to sell all the manuscripts you saw for 10,000 rupees. He has not sold any of the manuscripts yet. I could not yet ask him to deliver the keys for it because it is not known when the transaction would be completed." It is just an example how South Asian heritage was transported out of the places, be it the lost heritage of India, which had mostly been destroyed during the 12th century, for which Sankrityayan traveled to Tibet. Another example of it is the Pramanavartika manuscript, for which Sankrityayan visited Nepal, but was already taken by Professor Tucci to Italy from Nepal, though given just to copy. Later, Sankrityayan wrote Tucci about it, but we do not know about any further development regarding that manuscript. Sankrityayan writes a letter to the royal priest Hemraj Sharma regarding the manuscript, expressing his interest in taking on the task if Professor Tucci is not inclined to work on it. He offers to handle the commentary and the reworking of the Sanskrit verses should Tucci decide not to proceed. He writes, Dharmakirti's Pramanavartika is quite challenging and requires a commentary. If Professor Tucci is uncertain about it, I am happy to take on the task. Using the Tibetan translation, I will also recompose the original Sanskrit verses. This commentary can wait until Mr. Tucci publishes the verses, but if that doesn't happen, it might be too late. If there are no objections, please allow me to get the verses. Once I finish proofreading Vigyapti Matrata Siddhi, I will focus on this. Yours sincerely, Rahul Sankrityayan. Finally, Sankrityayan wrote a commentary on Pramanavartika and he dedicated his book to Russian Indologist Cherbatsky, who had a strong desire to work together with Sankrityayan on Buddhist philosophical texts, but unfortunately, Professor Cherbatsky died before the book came into print in 1943. In Sri Lanka, when Sankrityayan studied the works of those Western intellectuals, he says himself in Meri Jivan Yatra that it acted like आग में घी का काम किया. पाली त्रिपिटक में बुद्धकालीन भारत के समाज, राजनीति, भूगोल का बहुत काफी मसाला है. उन्होंने मेरी ऐतिहासिक भूख को बहुत तेज कर दिया था. पॉलिटिक्स सोसाइटी लंदन के त्रिपिटक संस्करणों की विद्वत्तापूर्ण भूमिकाओं ने आग में घी डालने का काम दिया और पॉलिटिक्स सोसाइटी जर्नल के पुराने अंकों को पढ़ने के लिए मैं मजबूर हुआ. फिर ब्रिटेन की रॉयल एशियाटिक सोसाइटी, सिलोन, बंगाल, बम्बई की उसकी शाखाओं के पुराने जर्नलों का बकायदा परायण शुरू हुआ. ब्राह्मी लिपि से मेरा परिचय हजारीबाग जेल में हुआ था और यहाँ तो एपिग्राफिया इंडिका की सारी जिल्दें उलट डाली. So what is this आग में घी? The आग is definitely the desire of searching of lost Indian heritage and bringing them back. Ghee is the inspiration and ideas that he got from those scholarly works. It signals that the desire of going to Tibet and working on the Buddhist texts got stronger in Sankrityayan. Thus, Sankrityayan is an Indian pride, as in those days when all the heritage were traveling towards Europe. Sankrityayan in those days understood the value of Indian heritage. We all know that he did not sell the Tibetan paintings in Paris, even to an attractive sum was offered. He rather decided to preserve them in Patna Museum. Recently, I discovered a letter written by Sankrityayan to the German Indologist Heinrich Luders in Germany. The letter was written in Sanskrit on 8 January 1928. The letter suggests that Sankrityayan finished studying Pali Tripitaka and he is now engaged in writing a book on it. He mentions about writing of a book with a title, A Geographical and Historical Study of Pali Tripitaka in Sanskrit with an English translation, which he wants to send to the university in Germany for a PhD qualification. I have not yet found any reference to Heinrich Luders in Sankrityayan's other writings and whether this correspondence was answered. We can see that already by the time of first Tibet travel, his goal was clear. Earlier, he was only concerned for Buddhism, but now his emphasis is on Indian Buddhism, and he is clear what he wants to do. He wants to bring back precious and historical Indian Buddhist texts back to India. In Tibetan Sava verse, he writes, 1927-28 में मैंने सिंघल प्रवास किया। उस समय मुझे फिर तिब्बत जाने की आवश्यकता मालूम हुई। मैंने देखा कि भारतीय दार्शनिकों के अनेक ग्रंथों के अनुवाद तथा भारतीय बौद्ध धर्म की बहुमूल्य ऐतिहासिक सामग्री मुझे तिब्बत जाने से ही मिल सकती है। मैंने निश्चय कर लिया कि पाली बौद्ध ग्रंथों का अध्ययन समाप्त कर तिब्बत अवश्य जाऊंगा। We have many evidence of how Sankrityayan praised Buddha as an important contributor to the advancement of India and Indian culture and Buddhist philosophy as an Indian heritage. I have discussed it in detail in my book. We have not met Sankrityayan personally. He appears to be a soft-spoken and kind-hearted individual based on what we have learned about his personality from his own writing and what others have written about him. As we discussed earlier, Sankrityayan expressed deep gratitude to many people who played significant roles in his life. He also regarded the Buddha with great adoration, even characterizing him as follows. बुद्ध का व्यक्तित्व सतभद्र सर्वतोभद्र है। इतिहास में ऐसा व्यक्ति मिलना दुर्लभ है जो प्रतिभा में, मधुर बर्ताव में, दीनहीनों के प्रति कार्य रूप में संवेदना दिखलाने में इतना ऊंचा हो जितने कि भारत के सर्वश्रेष्ठ पुत्र और मानवता के सर्वोत्तम पथ प्रदर्शक बुद्ध थे। It is likely that Sankrityayan was profoundly influenced by Buddha's example and close to emulate his character as he describes here. When he writes about Buddha, we can see how he not only shows his own respect to him, but always connects Indianness to it. Sankrityayan believes that the cultural superiority of India rests upon the attainments of Buddhist culture. भारत को बौद्ध धर्म की आवश्यकता इसलिए भी ज्यादा है क्योंकि बौद्ध धर्म ने कला, दर्शन और साहित्य के क्षेत्र में इतनी बहुमूल्य देनें दी हैं जिनका इससे मुकाबला करना कठिन है। Furthermore, मैंने बुद्ध की जीवनियां पढ़ी थी, यद्यपि मूल प्राचीन भाषा में नहीं। उस भूमि के भीतर प्रविष्ट होते वक्त मेरा हृदय 2500 वर्ष पहले के उस महान भारतीय की ओर खींचा हुआ था, जिसने अपनी जन्मभूमि का नाम संसार भर में फैला दिया और संसार के 1/3 के मनुष्यों के लिए भारत को पुण्य भूमि बना दिया। In conclusion, it is truly valuable that this conference has brought to light the forgotten hero whose contributions have often been overlooked, not only in India, but in the broader fields of Indian, Buddhist, and Tibetan studies. Remembering Sankrityayan is not merely an act of honoring him. It is also a powerful reminder to us of our collective responsibility to safeguard our heritage and recognize its immense significance. The act of remembering Sankrityayan serves as both a reflection on his determined spirit and a call to action for us to continue our respective tasks for preserving our cultural legacy. Sankrityayan inspires us to dedicate ourselves to the preservation and study of archival material, a field that encompasses not only Buddhist texts, but all kinds of materials of historical value. The preservation of these documents, whether ancient scriptures or modern records, holds immeasurable worth. Sankrityayan's unwavering commitment to the protection of Indian heritage was the driving force behind his remarkable endeavors, such as crossing the Himalayan passes on foot or by pony back on 4 separate journeys. These journeys were not only physical achievements, but symbolic of his restless pursuits to secure the cultural and scholarly treasures of India. For any Indian or South Asian reader, Sankrityayan serves as a powerful source of motivation and inspiration. His works not only encourages them to actively contribute to the preservation and celebration of their cultural heritage, but they also impart a deep understanding of the vital importance of safeguarding one's history. Through his compelling hidden message, Sankrityayan highlights the need to protect and honor traditions, ensuring that the richness of cultural identity is passed down to future generations. Whether or not the reader is already engaged in these efforts, the reading emphasizes the significance of acknowledging and preserving cultural heritage as an essential part of personal and collective identity. As scholars, many of us are engaged with manuscripts or source materials of historic importance in various forms. Personally, I am currently working with Indian manuscripts dating back to the time of the First World War. This demonstrates how we all, in our own ways, contribute to the preservation of our heritage, whether through research, restoration, or conservation efforts. And I would add that it is not only manuscripts of religious or scientific texts that are valuable as a heritage. Each and every document, photo, oral traditions, music, any object or instrument, a letter, or just a note on the cost of a loaf of bread has so much to say about the time and people for future. I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity to reflect on the remarkable life and work of Rahul Sankrityayan with all of you today. Thank you for your kind attention. Dhanyavad.
I am Dr. Pema from this institute. Can you hear me? Yeah?
हाँ
Yes,
देखिए
Yeah, yeah.
yes, yes,
When,
I can hear you.
yeah, when we are explaining about the aim and his, what's his uh, desire about Rahul Sankrityayan's desire and his wish to see the India as I mean, learning about Buddha and Buddhism, and but you know, afterward, Rahul Sankirtan he became communists. Yeah, he became communist. So how you combine these two things? How you can, you can say how you can join these two together. The comrades and Buddhism. His view.
Communism and Buddhism, is it
Yeah,
question to
because and prior he
Mr.
was
Chattopadhyay?
prior he was so attached to Buddhism. Yeah,
I think it's to Alka ji.
yeah.
Alka ji, I think question is directed to you.
Okay. So, yes, thank you so much for your question. I mean, this I have already dealt in my book. So, shortly, what I would like to say is Rahul Sankrityayan saw the concept of Sangha, uh, concept of not being any caste in Buddhism. So, he says that he always compares communism and Buddhism, and he says that Buddhism was, I mean, very similar to communism. That's why he likes it. So that was his connecting point, Buddha Sangha. And the concept of Buddha Sangha was very similar to that. So that was the driving fact, or that was the main point he always mentions.